Buenos Aires es la ciudad de las oportunidades. Tenemos talento, pasión y un potencial enorme.
Tenemos por un lado las industrias más duras, como puede ser el real estate, la construcción de autopistas, la construcción de infraestructura, pero también somos muy fuertes en todas las industrias más soft, que tiene que ver con el diseño, con la industria audiovisual, con el arte, con el mundo de la tecnología, del software, de la programación, del turismo.
Buenos Aires es sin duda un excelente lugar para hacer negocios. Y cada vez que propongo un lugar para hacer una reunión de negocios, por unanimidad gana Buenos Aires.
Estás en el punto medio entre Londres y Los Ángeles. Es decir, que siempre estás en la zona horaria de alguien.
La ciudad, por su parte, definió una serie de industrias estratégicas de alto valor agregado.
Si uno piensa, por ejemplo, los 10 emprendimientos más importantes de tecnología de Latinoamérica, 5 son argentinos.
El porteño es picante, es divertido, es energético, es inquieto, le gusta hacer cosas todo el tiempo, hace cosas sensacionales.
Donde veas éxito, va a haber un argentino, va a haber alguien de Buenos Aires empujando, haciendo, creando, siendo parte de un equipo exitoso.
Buenos Aires es cabeza de tendencia. En Buenos Aires se empiezan a palpar tendencias que después rebotan o magnifican en otros países.
Que indudablemente Buenos Aires es una usina de talento, es un lugar donde se generan muchas capacidades, pero además también se atrae mucha gente.
Tenemos el talento, tenemos los emprendedores dispuestos a asumir riesgo y tenemos un contexto que acompaña para invertir y para que un emprendedor haga crecer su emprendimiento desde Buenos Aires hacia el mundo.
Buenos Aires tiene algo especial. Cada persona que uno conoce de distintos lugares del mundo y que vino a Buenos Aires siempre quiere volver. Y bueno, eso dice mucho.
El lugar es Buenos Aires y el momento es ahora.
Es ahora.
Es ahora.
Es ahora.
Es ahora.
Es ahora.
El momento es ahora.
Ahora, ya.
Vengan a Buenos Aires, que el momento es ahora.
Bueno, y es ahora que empieza esto, así que muchas gracias por estar acá, gracias por haber hecho la cola afuera, hay 2 cuadras de cola. Soy Julia Bearsi, directora ejecutiva de Endeavor, y tengo el placer de una vez más tener la posibilidad de reunir en este encuentro a referentes mundiales de la innovación, el emprendedorismo y la inversión, esta vez en Argentina. Y esta vez en alianza con el Ministerio de Producción de la Nación y la Agencia de Desarrollo de las Inversiones y el Comercio Exterior de la Ciudad de Buenos Aires. Muchas gracias a ellos por apoyarnos y hacer posible esta iniciativa. Gracias. También quiero agradecer especialmente a los medios y a los periodistas que siempre nos ayudan a amplificar este tipo de iniciativas y llegar cada vez a más gente. Y esta vez en este teatro, cuando pensamos el lugar ideal para hacer este encuentro, sin duda era este. Un lugar en donde los artistas dejan su huella en la cultura. Y al igual que los artistas, los emprendedores también dejan su marca en la cultura de nuestro país. Desde Endeavor, además de promover el emprendedorismo de alto impacto, promovemos el desarrollo de la cultura emprendedora. Me gustaría ahora compartir con ustedes, con motivo de los 20 años de Endeavor a nivel internacional, hemos hecho un video que me gustaría que vean, así que lo pido por favor. Muchas gracias. Ahora quiero darle la bienvenida al jefe de gobierno de la ciudad de Buenos Aires, Horacio Rodríguez Larreta, por favor.
La verdad que emocionante lo que hace Endeavor, ¿eh? Para nosotros, para la ciudad, es un orgullo trabajar en equipo con Endeavor, con el Gobierno Nacional, acá representado por Pancho, el Ministerio de la Producción. Estamos convencidos, y en eso estamos trabajando, que el futuro de nuestro país, y especialmente el futuro de nuestra ciudad, se basa en el crecimiento y en el desarrollo de las industrias basadas en el talento, basadas en la creatividad, en la economía del conocimiento. Estamos convencidos desde la ciudad que tenemos una muy buena ventaja comparativa en términos de capital humano, tanto de gente que vive en Buenos Aires, que nació en Buenos Aires, o de muchos que vienen del interior del país, incluso del exterior, a estudiar a la ciudad y después se quedan. Nosotros hoy para que tengan idea, a veces los límites son medios borrosos, pero más o menos el 10% de lo que produce la ciudad, del Producto Bruto, surge de las industrias creativas. Nosotros nos pusimos como objetivo que en 10 años tenemos que duplicarlo, llegar al 20%, es ambicioso, pero estamos en ese camino. El éxito que hemos tenido con la política que empezó Pancho, que seguimos con Andy, nosotros ahora en la ciudad, en el distrito tecnológico, es un muy buen reflejo de eso. Tenemos más de 8.000 personas que ya están trabajando, 240 empresas que ya tienen su locación, o están mudadas o ya tienen el lugar identificado, ¿sí? En un momento, además, los 5 años anteriores, de muy baja inversión en la Argentina, y así todo el distrito tecnológico explotó. Entonces, en ese camino ahí es donde vemos que hay mucha creatividad. Todos los indicadores lo muestran, ¿no? Creo que de los 6 unicornios latinoamericanos, 4 surgieron de este país y de esta ciudad. Todos los indicadores en términos de emprendedurismo muestran a Buenos Aires como una capital con un potencial enorme. Y por eso es muy importante que lo abramos al mundo. Por eso es muy importante que organicemos juntos esta 6ª edición, ¿no?, de Buenos Aires al mundo. Para el emprendedor, la internacionalización realmente es un paso importantísimo para darle escala, para darle potencia a los proyectos. Y desde el gobierno, y digo gobierno porque hoy somos un solo equipo, ¿no? Con Pancho trabajamos, es lo mismo, la Agencia de Inversiones de la ciudad, que organiza hoy acá, con la Nacional, coincidimos en esta visión de potenciar estas industrias. Estamos dándole todo el impulso posible, ¿no? El distrito tecnológico, el distrito audiovisual que tenemos en la zona de colegiales. Estamos lanzando ahora un proyecto muy ambicioso en el predio que es del Tiro Federal para hacer también todo un polo de la innovación. Todo el apoyo, tenemos el programa que se llama la Academia Buenos Aires Emprende, que damos cursos de emprendedurismo y apoyo en todos los barrios de la ciudad. O sea, le ponemos mucha energía a todo lo que es la atracción de estudiantes extranjeros. Hoy tenemos casi 70.000 estudiantes extranjeros en Buenos Aires, con un programa muy activo para seguir atrayendo, ¿sí? Así que en eso estamos, yo estoy convencido que tenemos un potencial para seguir creciendo. Todo lo que es la industria alrededor del mundo de la cultura y del arte, que está haciendo explotar la zona alrededor de la Boca, alrededor de la usina. Cada movida que generamos ahí genera muchísima expectativa y participación. Pero ahí el objetivo, como dije, lo repito y es claro, tenemos que duplicar la participación de la economía creativa en lo que la ciudad produce. Y eso, más allá del impulso y el rol, liderazgo que tenemos desde el Estado, claramente lo vamos a hacer trabajando juntos. Hay muchas organizaciones como Endeavor posiblemente es de las que más ha crecido este tiempo, ¿no? Que más potencia, que más ha generado desarrollo de emprendedores, pero hay muchas instituciones con las que trabajamos en equipo para impulsar al mundo emprendedor y al mundo de la economía de la creatividad. No tengo duda que el futuro va por ahí, ¿sí? Los servicios basados en el conocimiento. Y de vuelta, tenemos un enorme capital humano. Tenemos una red de universidades como ninguna otra ciudad en Latinoamérica, ¿sí? Así que yo los invito a que lo trabajemos en equipo. Desde el Estado asumimos la responsabilidad que tenemos, pero solo no lo vamos a poder hacer. Tenemos que seguir viendo cómo potenciar lo más importante para estas industrias, que es el capital humano. Sí, la plata, la inversión viene atrás del capital humano, ¿no? Por eso es tan importante atraer talento, conservar el talento que ya tenemos en la ciudad y atraer más talento que elija esta ciudad para vivir y para desarrollar sus emprendimientos. Así que iniciativas como esta no tengo dudas que ayudan en esa dirección. muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos y de vuelta, estamos abiertos a toda idea, a toda sugerencia que nos puedan acercar para ver cómo juntos potenciamos estas industrias creativas. Gracias.
Ahora sí, para dar apertura, quiero presentar al ministro Pancho Cabrera, ministro de Producción, por favor. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Buenos días a todos. Gracias, Horacio. Bueno, y bienvenidos a los visitantes extranjeros, también a la ciudad de Buenos Aires y a la Argentina. Como dijo Horacio, la verdad, Buenos Aires, para resumirlo, se ha transformado tal vez en la ciudad más vibrante y más energética de Latinoamérica, y esto tiene mucho que ver con el espíritu emprendedor y con lo que estamos viviendo acá, y que todos los días hacemos algo para promover la inversión emprendedora y ese espíritu emprendedor en Argentina y en Buenos Aires. La buena noticia es que hay un solo equipo ahora, que es el equipo de la Nación, de la ciudad, pero que se reproduce también en toda la Argentina. La verdad es que hemos logrado poner en toda la Argentina clubes de emprendedores, ciudades emprendedoras, polos de la innovación, y es algo que se ve que está en el ADN de los argentinos, y esa tal vez sea la razón por la cual Horacio comentaba que de los 6 unicornios de Latinoamérica, 4 nacieron en la Argentina, y nosotros consideramos héroes a los fundadores de estos unicornios y querríamos tener muchos más, querríamos clonarlos para tener muchos más de ellos, generando trabajo, generando empleo y generando oportunidades en la Argentina. Quiero hacer referencia primero a Endeavor, porque la verdad es que el trabajo que ha hecho Endeavor en un contexto que muchas veces ha sido muy difícil, ha sido impresionante. La verdad que ha tenido un impacto en todo esto muy, muy fuerte, y es un trabajo que otro no hubiera hecho. Y alrededor de Endeavor hubo muchísimos empresarios, emprendedores, ejecutivos de empresas, políticos, que estuvieron y estuvimos apoyando Endeavor, y que, bueno, que ha tenido los resultados que ha tenido en la Argentina, como digo yo, en un contexto muy adverso en los últimos 15 años. Tal vez haya sido bueno que haya sido adverso el contexto, porque esto le da más fuerza a veces al espíritu emprendedor, y está vivo ese tema de sobreponerse a las adversidades. Yo quiero hacer alguna referencia a lo que está pasando en la Argentina. Lo que está pasando en la Argentina ahora, que es un cambio. Nosotros, en estos últimos 2 años de gobierno nacional, hemos transformado la Argentina de ser un país aislado a ser lo que nosotros decimos un país normal. ¿Qué es un país normal? Y que se parece un poco al resto de los países, a donde se puede invertir, a donde se puede pagar dividendos, a donde se puede emitir deuda, donde se pueden hacer empresas, donde hay cierta seguridad jurídica sobre el futuro de las inversiones. Y esto han pasado 2 años y ha habido un cambio sustancial entre esa Argentina aislada durante tantos años y lo que nosotros llamamos un país normal. Pero llegado hasta este punto, nosotros decidimos en la Argentina hacer lo que llamamos las reformas de segunda generación y darle un impulso fuerte a la Argentina para que crezca y se integre efectivamente en el mundo. Entonces estamos haciendo reformas laborales, tributarias, acuerdos internacionales de libre comercio, que le van a dar una fisonomía productiva a la Argentina muy diferente en los próximos 3 o 4 meses respecto de lo que es hoy. Entonces yo les quiero contar esto porque me parece que es el contexto alrededor del cual florecen las inversiones y aparecen las oportunidades. Argentina va a ser un país necesariamente integrado al mundo. En los últimos 15 años de aislamiento de Argentina, Argentina fue un país muy cerrado. En términos para medirlo con algún indicador, las exportaciones de Argentina respecto de su PBI nos ponen terceros de abajo para arriba en el ranking internacional respecto de países cerrados. Pero nosotros estamos a punto de cerrar un acuerdo con la Unión Europea. Esto va a hacer que vayamos a tener acuerdos de libre comercio con el 9% del PBI del mundo y vamos a pegar un salto importante para tener acuerdos de libre comercio con el 30% del PBI del mundo, lo cual ya nos da acceso a mercados sumamente relevantes. Así que ese es el contexto general y uno de los ejes del crecimiento de la economía argentina va a ser lo que nosotros llamamos la economía del conocimiento. Nosotros tenemos la certeza de que tenemos elementos, masa crítica, fortalezas, como dijo Horacio, en la ciudad de Buenos Aires tiene 39 universidades. 39 universidades. Entonces tenemos la fortaleza y la masa crítica como para lanzar y apoyar fuertemente todo lo que tenga que ver con la economía del conocimiento, porque nosotros decimos no es un sector la economía del conocimiento, es una categoría y es una disciplina que mejora la productividad de toda la economía. Por eso es que le damos tanta importancia y creemos que esto va a mejorar la productividad del agro, de la industria, de los servicios en general, de la actividad académica, de la actividad científica, y por eso le hemos dado tanta importancia. Ayer tuvimos fue un día importante ayer, porque lanzamos todo el paquete desde el gobierno, de todo el paquete que tiene que ver como cómo financiamos al emprendedorismo a partir de, le fijamos 3 categorías: capital semilla, aceleradoras y capital emprendedor o venture capital. Y tuvimos la visita de algunos venture capitalists muy importantes como Draper, que nos hizo un escenario de lo que estaba pasando en el mundo a partir de diferentes tecnologías y puso especial énfasis en una nueva tecnología que es blockchain, como algo que va a ser la base, como fue Internet solamente en su momento, que creó una revolución alrededor de todo lo que tuvo que ver con el correo, o lo que tuvo que ver con las comunicaciones, o lo que tiene que ver con los servicios distribuidos, como, no voy a decir Uber acá porque Buenos Aires todavía nos falta para tener a Uber aprobado, pero en algún momento llegará. Así que bueno, estamos en eso, estamos trabajando fuertemente. Quiero que ustedes tengan claro de que nosotros somos un gobierno que estamos siempre en contacto con el sector emprendedor y por lo tanto estamos aprendiendo y llevando adelante lo que necesita. Hace muy poco lanzamos una ley de emprendedores que está siendo aprobada en todos los días recibo algún mensajito de WhatsApp diciendo que se aprobó en alguna provincia. Esto nos permite hacer algunas cosas importantes, como por ejemplo hacer una sociedad en 24 horas o en 15 minutos en realidad, pero yo creo que falta todavía, falta que sea más simple para un emprendedor llevar adelante su emprendimiento y crear una compañía que pueda crecer y que pueda agregar valor y sobre todo generar empleo. Así que les quiero dar la bienvenida nuevamente y contarles que estamos a su disposición para seguir trabajando. Muchísimas gracias.
Contarles también que estamos transmitiendo todo lo que está pasando en este escenario a través de nuestro canal de YouTube y también nos pueden seguir y pueden publicar con el hashtag Silicon Valley MBA. Antes de presentar el primer panel, quiero entonces invitarlos a aprovechar todo el contenido que tenemos previsto para hoy. Los invito a desafiarse y a expandir sus propios límites y a inspirarse de la mano de estos grandes referentes. Muchas gracias. Martín, Migoya y Chef Burton, por favor. Gracias.
Okay, good morning. How are you, everybody? So, Jeff, thank you very much for coming to Argentina. For us, it's a huge honor to receive you here. As a great entrepreneur, as a founder of one of the most admired companies in the planet, which is Electronic Arts.
Thank you.
I don't know how many people here play FIFA or one of those, you know,
it has
small
broad
games.
Reach, yes. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. So, Jeff, I would like to kick off the questions and go back to the early days. you know? You're one of those cases that take a company that starts in a garage or whatever it started and transforming it into a $32 billion giant, you know, and we would love to know and to hear, you know, your experiences from those early days and how you were living it and how you were thinking it global and what's the vision at that moment, so our entrepreneurs here can learn from that and try to emulate that in the future.
Sure, I think there are a lot of things that we were doing 35 years ago that are still applicable to startup companies today. But of course, the circumstances were different. There was no internet. There were no cell phones. We started out with 6 people. We didn't start in a garage. We were not a garage startup. We had our first meeting to even conceive of what kind of company we wanted to form at the ringleader's home in the hills behind Stanford. It was a very nice home. Our CEO, Trip Hawkins, who owned it. He called us all together. We had a dinner to talk about what kind of company we might want to be a part of. I, at the time, was at Atari, and I was the only one that was involved in an entertainment, a video game company at all. The others there were people from Apple, but the 6 of us, all of us had Stanford backgrounds. 3 of us, Trip, Bing, and I, were in the same business school class at Stanford. So we'd known each other for about at least 7 years, 8 years, something like that at that time. And we all got together to talk about what kind of company we wanted. So we began in the living room and the dining room of Trip's home, and then we moved immediately into an office space at, it was actually a conference room in the offices of Sequoia Capital. This is Don Valentine's offices. So we didn't start in a garage like Hewlett-Packard did. And our mission, what we felt like our mission should be, and by the way, this is a surprise to a lot of people, and that is that we all had marketing backgrounds. We were not technical people. Our undergraduate degrees mine was anthropology at Stanford, Bing was English major at Yale. Trip had a degree, at Harvard you write your own major, and his was strategy gaming, but he didn't know how to code. None of us who started the company knew how to code. What we felt like we knew how to do was to market products, and in the beginning of the company, the company went up and down for many years. And I remember one conversation we had early on when we were just getting started and wondering, let's see, is the market big enough to be able to support us? Can we actually make, we want to be a publisher of entertainment software, and we were worried that you know, what if we can't find the right products to succeed? And I think it was Rich Melman, who was one of our co-founders, he said, well, you know, with this group, we'll just find another product and market that. If we have to get out of this industry, if we have to pivot into something else, we can do it. And it made us all kind of chuckle at the time, because that was one of the things that I think we all felt, was that among the 6 of us, it was the most talented group of people we had ever been in contact with, we'd ever collaborated with. And so we felt like we could do whatever we needed to do, whatever it took, we could be successful. And what we thought at the time, and of course you always have to be flexible in a startup, we thought that the education market was going to be the place that we would have the most impact. We would make the most impact with edutainment products. In fact, we were hoping that was the case. Our first print ad had as one of the titles in the copy of the ad, it was software worthy of the minds that use it. So we were thinking about, we kind of had this, Trip came up with this phrase, simple, hot, and deep, for our products, because we wanted them to carry a lot of meaning. and be educational experiences. But we also wanted them to have an emotional impact on people. We wanted to provide an emotional experience with a computer, which at that time were the experience was primarily spreadsheets, word processors, maybe a database, maybe a calendar. Some people were talking about keeping recipes on a computer. Well, that was just utilitarian, and we wanted to bring an emotional relationship through the video games and experiences that we would publish. We wanted to have an emotional attachment. One of our early developers, who was named Bill Budge, he was quoted. We have a video of him in 1983 talking about his concept of, or his belief that every piece of software should contain a software friend. And not many people were thinking about software friends in products. Not many people were thinking about getting emotionally attached to a character in a game. And so that was what we sort of felt like was going to be a successful way to proceed, and it turned out that is the case. People today come up to me all the time and say that their childhood, they spent hours and hours and days of their childhood playing our games, and they have an emotional attachment to the company of Electronic Arts for that reason. And so I think that in that regard, we ended up being very successful in allowing people to establish an emotional relationship with a computer, of all things.
Yeah, it looks like what you have created, that emotional attachment that you have created, and you have kind of invented within the gaming industry, now has expanded into other areas. And now you see other entertainment companies trying to emulate that emotional connection with consumers, but not just entertainment companies, but now banks and telecommunication companies. Everybody's trying to connect emotionally to that. Do you see that trend that will keep on going, that will keep on growing, or you see that trend that will be more centered on the entertainment business?
Oh, no, I think it's going to be much more broadly spread over the next years into every industry, and part of it is just this is not minor, but you need to relate to your customer, no matter what industry you're in. Mm-hmm. You need to understand the customer's feelings and needs, and so to the extent that is a part of the relationship that gets built, understanding the customer needs, that applies to any industry.
It looks like the evolution of the industry has taken many new opportunities, and since Steve Jobs said, okay, here's my new device, and presented the iPhone 10 years ago, until now, it has been a massive evolution, and hundreds of new technologies appearing to be like the next big disruption in technology. And one of those was virtual reality and big data and augmented reality, among many others. You have founded, in the last few years, and now I'm talking from the past into the present, mm-hmm. Like two different companies. One called Holodeck, which is a virtual reality technology for gaming. Another one called
BitDegree,
mm-hmm. which is about online education and connecting that with the blockchain, which is really amazing. So let's talk a bit about virtual reality. Virtual reality used to, or is supposed to be, one of those big technological disruptions after the iPhone 10 years ago. Now, when you see the numbers, you see that just 4 million devices has been sold on 2016. apparently they are very bulky and definitions still on the early days. And there's a lot of barriers for the adoption of that technology that at least I'm seeing as a technologist. Yeah. So I would love to see your opinion, as founder of Holodeck, how that technology will evolve and how virtual reality will play, something different for us in the future.
Sure. Well, I see some analogies to the position that virtual reality has right now to where we were at Electronic Arts 35 years ago. The first home computers that we were putting video games on, like, for instance, the Apple, it didn't have any sound capabilities to speak of. It didn't have thousands of colors. It just had CMYK, and the graphic screens that we were able to create only allowed us to put stick figures to represent people on the screen. So it took maybe I'd say at least 10 years, from 82 to 92, for the tools, the software tools development, the technology development to advance to the point where we could then produce a product like FIFA football, where the characters move like real people, they look like the actual players, they interact, there's great sound, there's real sound. That took years for technology to catch up, and I think that's where virtual reality stands right now. Is it's just beginning to make an impact, and it'll require some technological advancements. But those technologies are in the works right now. So over the next few years, I think it'll really become a huge business. And to start out with, the company I'm involved with called Holodeck VR. We are a spin-out from a Fraunhofer Institute in Germany, who has developed a technology to track. It's an enabling technology for virtual reality in large spaces, including up to 100 people in the same virtual reality scene, interacting with each other as avatars in a virtual reality. So that is a way for the general population out of home to be able to experience it without having to buy a headset. And it's such an amazing transformational experience and an emotional one that I think that will give rise to the expansion of the market over the next few years. Think of every elementary school. Well, this is in the United States, so I don't know if it's the case here, but high schools and elementary schools, public schools, all have gymnasiums that are enclosed. Those are perfect spaces for virtual reality to be able to be experienced by classes. Up to 30 people in the class at the same time can get into the virtual reality scene from the Roman Colosseum thousands of years ago and interact with each other as if they were there, present. What a fantastic way to learn. You can also have your class go into the gymnasium and have everybody participating in an experience on the moon. You never forget those kinds of learning experiences, and I think that's where certainly a location-based virtual reality can take the world. And then it'll eventually. You remember when Atari first started? Their machines, their video games were only in bars or arcades, video arcades. You had to leave your home to go play an Atari game. Put quarters in the machine. I think that's analogous to where we are now with virtual reality. It'll be an out-of-home experience for a while until the headsets get less expensive, the software yes, and the clarity and everything gets up to speed. But in the meantime, there will be places you can go to experience it with a group of people that is mind-blowing, really.
I absolutely agree with that. But it looks like, the common factor of, electronic arts and also holodeck, and now BitDegree, is something that you're passionate about, which is education. And, you talk about education, doing education through gaming. You talk about doing education through virtual reality. So tell us more about the new venture called BitDegree and how you are seeing, online education and the future of that.
Right. When I go to hackathons with developers, I've, over the past 5-10 years even, I've always asked the 50 or 60 people that come to a weekend hackathon to develop an idea. I've asked them, how many of you learned your skills that you're using this weekend at school? Absolutely no one. No one raises his hand or her hand. It's all self-taught. They've learned outside of school. So I realized that the school systems are teaching students what they need to know about history. I mean, what they used to need to know. The school systems have not kept up with what people need to do and learn in order to be successful in their lives as they move forward, to grow up now. And so what I think is going to happen, and what BitDegree is trying to do is to change the paradigm of online learning and allow people to get paid to learn rather than having to pay to learn.
To get paid to learn?
Yes.
So how is that?
Well, as soon as you sign up for a course...
Many people interested, clearly.
Yeah. It's through cryptocurrencies. But it's using the blockchain, which is immutable and universal. You can create a smart contract on Ethereum. This is where it's based, is Ethereum. And the smart contract is initiated when you enter the course. And when you complete a course, there's an automatic payment of cryptocurrency to you for having taken the course. And it's offered by a sponsor. What this does is allows industries to create and track a whole pool of talent that they think they need, because engineers are are scarce and are getting more scarce as we move forward with technologies. We need more and more people to know how to program, to take additional trainings. And to be able to prove it. Well, because the blockchain is able to be, is so secure, you can't make changes to things. It all gets recorded in Ethereum. And then the crypto currencies that are used they're tokens, utility tokens, that are used to pay students to complete courses. It's an automatic thing. And that is a big incentive because right now online courses have a dropout rate of about 80%, and so BitDegree is dedicated to changing that ratio. And where will the funds or the cryptocurrencies come from? Is from corporations that have a need for certain kinds of training to be gained by potential employees. It's much more efficient to recruit from a pool of people that already have the credentials that are needed for jobs. If you are able to track them like that, and so I think that's going to be a game changer in online education.
Yeah, I think also to your point about what we're teaching to our children and to our people, is that for years and years the content has been the center of what we teach, and I think that through gaming and through other things that has been happening in the planet, the idea of teaching people how to learn is much more important than teaching the content itself.
Yeah.
So what's your opinion on that? Do you have,
I
do you
agree
have a view on
100%.
that?
There's a friend of mine I've known for 35 years who has started and this begins with early learning, pre-kindergarten. That's when young people today, young people, babies, 2-year-olds, I know plenty of them that have started playing with iPads. They can learn how to learn about letters, learn about numbers, learn some math at age 3 and 4 and 5 using technology. Now, my friend in the Netherlands has started what he calls the Steve Jobs schools. Every student in pre-kindergarten through 6th grade is given an iPad, and the curriculum is based on apps, educational apps on the iPad. And so students can choose the course of studies that they want to take and go through them as fast as they want. It's at their choice. What's happening in the schools, he's got about 20 schools in the Netherlands, public schools, who are using this technology for early learning, early education. What's happening is that students are, excelling way beyond what the normal classroom teaching style is, because they're able they're able to choose what they want to learn and learn it as fast as they can and move as far along as they need to. That's a long-term change, but it needs to happen too. And I think that online learning is going to have a similar kind of impact because you're doing it for yourself. You're in control of your own education, and that's really important. It's not you're not getting some masterminds delivering the knowledge to you. You're seeking it, and I think that's what is so important about now the internet and smartphones all over the world. Billions of people have them now.
Let's go back. Let's go into more the entrepreneurial ecosystem, questions. And my question here is the first is what are the factors that, in your view, needs to happen for an entrepreneurial ecosystem to be successful? Which are the do's and the don'ts, and which is the role that you think that the government needs to have on this? And what's your experience about this on the Silicon Valley?
Okay. Silicon Valley has been around for 70, well, in its current form, sort of, at least 70 years, 80 years maybe. It was post-World War II. And something that people I don't think quite understand now that there's so much talk about venture capitalists and there is so much activity with that from that source. Most people don't realize that the U.S. government spent billions of dollars in developing the whole ecosystem of Silicon Valley. It was the Department of Defense at the time, but it was government money that really started the whole system. There was a dean of engineering at Stanford named Frederick Terman, who one of the things he required of his professors in engineering was that they take a leave of absence and go start a company. He was able to get those companies funded through the government, his contacts with the government. So he had all these engineering professors that went out and started companies, but he told them they could come back and teach once they had that experience. And most of them did because they wanted to be professors. But they also had the experience of having started a company, and that made a huge difference in the way they dealt with their classes of students in engineering, and I think that kind of started the whole idea of getting out and getting practical experience in addition to the to the technical knowledge that you had to have. Something that I know that Bill Hewlett and David Packard both were students of Fred Terman, and when they started Hewlett Packard, one of the policies that they employed was that any Hewlett-Packard employee that wanted to leave and start his or her own company, they were welcome to, and that they were guaranteed a job at Hewlett-Packard if they wanted to come back. So there was not, that was a kind of a virtuous cycle that was started. Even today, that's happening without maybe the explicit policies. But I was talking with some of the Google executive a few months ago, asking, how do you find all the engineers that you need to hire all the time? And he said, well, you'd be surprised. The largest number of people that we hire are former Google employees. So they have a revolving door as well. Maybe that's not their policy, but they know that if they've selected someone already and that person leaves to go start another company or join another startup, they're welcome to come back to Google anytime because they know that they meet the standards that they expect, and at the most or at the least they've gained much more experience elsewhere and can add that to Google's community again. So that kind of thing is really important, and as I say, the government started the whole ball rolling, and it's been 70, 80 years now. And after that length of time, it is a continuous force.
Well, it looks like with some delay, but we just started something like that. We're matching fund from the government to start up companies here. So I want to celebrate that because that's extremely important here. So.
And I've heard of the plan
111,000.
Yeah.
Yes. 111,000.
Right. That sounds like a great plan. Too.
Yes, it's a great plan. It's a great plan. So, it's your third time in Argentina.
Second time.
Second time in Argentina, as you told me a few minutes ago. And after being for this second time in Argentina, after 3 years that you were here before, what's your initial reaction? What you think are the changes? How you see the business environment here in Argentina?
Well, it's been remarkable because 3 years ago, things were just starting to be talked about that I thought were important in the environment for entrepreneurs and startups to begin to thrive, and yet it was the very early, felt like the very early stages. This time, 3 years later, I find that the attitude is so much more positive and forward-looking and optimistic about the future that everybody I've talked to has expressed the belief that Argentina has a fantastic future just in the next few years. It's going to explode, and that's what I'm feeling here now, which I didn't feel 3 years ago.
Yeah, that's remarkable. So we have here, just to finish, but we have here hundreds of entrepreneurs and people eager for ideas and structures to think about ideas, and I think that these moments of inspiration are very, very important, and I would love to see and to know those unwritten Jeff Burton rules of success, and I only want 3 of them, all right?
Three.
And if you can add on top of the 3 one thing that you did very, very wrong, that would be great. Not very wrong, but
Okay, no, I can probably come up with that. The first one is
like 3 main tips.
3 main tips. Okay, the first one is to follow your passion and be honest with yourself and all of your relationships. It's so easy to get caught up and do things that you are ashamed of, treating people poorly, not being honest with your customers. It's easy to get into that, and you always succeed, I think, and feel better about yourself if you're completely honest. And that means even doing things that maybe don't give you the advantage from time to time, making decisions that maybe don't give you an advantage. One example I can come up with is that Electronic Arts had the opportunity to buy Rockstar Games that makes Grand Theft Auto. And it would have added $1 billion a year in revenues just that one game. But our CEO, Larry Probst, he was chairman and CEO. We hired him in our second year, and he walked away from that opportunity just because he didn't feel like Grand Theft Auto was the kind of product that Electronic Arts wanted to have in its portfolio. He gave up $1 billion revenues annually because it didn't really fit the right thing. I think that was the right thing to do. It hasn't hurt Electronic Arts to not have Grand Theft Auto in its portfolio, and I think it kept the company truer to its origins, and I think that's what you've always got to try to keep in mind is what you're passionate about, and you've got to follow it honestly, and so that's one thing. I would say another thing, unwritten rule, is that money doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I mean, yes, you're in it because you're in it for a number of reasons. You're passionate about your product or your company. You want to be in control of your own life, which a startup allows you to feel like you're doing more, even though there are certain aspects you can't control. But the whole idea, when we started Electronic Arts, we weren't doing it so we could get rich. We were doing it because we really thought it was a great endeavor to start up a company and make it work. And in fact, we all found out that having a lot of money doesn't make that much difference in your life. Doing what you have a passion for is what makes the difference. Doing something that means something to other people is what makes the difference. Not having a bunch of money. That doesn't solve problems at all. In fact, it often creates a lot more problems for people than they realize it will. And so that's the second thing. You know, money will come as a consequence of doing what you really know you want to do and need to do and you're driven to do. I guess the last one that's an unwritten kind of ethic is to give back, to help other people realize their dreams in starting companies. When you're successful, every one of us at Electronic Arts that made a lot of money have all invested in other companies as well. Not necessarily tons, you know, small amounts, but you're putting money back into the ecosystem to help other people realize their dreams, and that's an unwritten rule that I think has a huge impact on the way Silicon Valley has been able to sustain itself. And what's really cool is I've seen this time I've heard and seen heard stories and seen people who are here in Buenos Aires who've been successful, who are doing that, who are giving back already. And that's a great signal, I think, that there's an ecosystem here that has a tremendous amount of potential.
Jeff, thank you very much for this great conversation. The time is up, but I want to say thank you because this has been extremely inspiring for everybody. And we look forward to have you here more often. So thank you, Jeff.
My pleasure.
Thank you for everybody here.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Gracias. Bueno, y ahora quiero presentar el próximo panel. Quiero invitar a José del Río, un amigo de Endeavor que siempre nos acompaña y que hace muy bien, modera muy bien los paneles y va a sacarle todo el mayor jugo posible a los invitados que tenemos para hoy. Gracias, Hernán Kazah, Mike Volpi, Jan Smith y Santi Subotovsky. Gracias por estar acá.
Muchas gracias a Julia, muchas gracias a Endeavor. Amamos a los que emprenden, amamos a la gente que hace. Y ahora tenemos acá un panel de 4 personas. El panel va a ser en inglés, pero la introducción me permito hacérselas en español, que ya les avisé a quienes nos acompañan aquí. Ahí lo ven a mi izquierda, de camisa celeste, él es Hernán Kazah. Hernán es cofundador de Mercado Libre, allá lejos y hace tiempo, pero hoy tiene el sombrero de Kaszek Ventures, fue COO, fue CFO de Mercado Libre. El 100% de lo que invierte, lo invierte en América Latina y tiene hoy, está al frente de 3 fondos, cerca de 430 millones de dólares para invertir. Algunos ya fueron invertidos y una de las últimas inversiones fue Digital House. Bienvenido, Hernán. También tenemos allí a la izquierda, lo vemos con su currículum, que es sin dudas para destacar, Ian Smith. Él participó de los deals realmente más importantes en 23 años que lleva en Allen & Company, en LinkedIn y Microsoft, para que se den una idea, por unos 28.000 millones de dólares. También Amazon y Twitch, Facebook y WhatsApp por 19.000 millones de dólares o 19 billones, Yahoo y Alibaba. Bueno, todo lo que tiene que ver con el mundo de private equity es sin duda su expertise. Ian, bienvenido. Welcome. A la derecha lo vemos aquí a Mike Volpi. Mike es un auténtico ciudadano internacional. Para que se den una idea, él nació en Italia, después creció en Japón y finalmente decidió ir a estudiar a Stanford, donde se recibió, tiene base hoy en Silicon Valley y se sumó a Index Ventures en 2009. 75 compañías fueron sus adquisiciones en los últimos años y es casi, les diría, uno de los padres de Internet, porque en Cisco, cuando él estaba allí, cuando trabajaba y era uno de los directivos claves, tenían 500 empleados, pero cuando se fue tenían 60.000 y era una época en la cual la infraestructura de Internet todavía no se conocía. Y lo vemos allí a la derecha, otro argentino que está aquí en este panel, que es Santiago Subotovsky. Él es el número 1 de Emergence Capital, que viene de emergente, capital emergente, lo que puede crecer y hay que descubrir a tiempo. Es uno de los 3 argentinos con nombre propio en Silicon Valley. También allí está Kaszek, que después viene, Alex Méndez como otro de los protagonistas argentinos y fundador de una de las compañías que era Tecnonexo, donde llegó a tener 150 empleados y también es parte de Puente Labs, que es quienes potencian, quienes mentorean a los fundadores de alto potencial. Así que con esta introducción vamos a arrancar y la primera pregunta en este caso se la vamos a hacer a Hernán. Hernán, ahí agarramos un micrófono y nos volcamos al inglés, vamos por el inglés. Which are the opportunities to invest in Latin America and in Silicon Valley specifically?
Well, thank you. Pleasure to be here. I'll speak mainly about Argentina, and maybe one of my colleagues can speak about the Silicon Valley. In Argentina, I think there are many opportunities. Technology is generating opportunities across the board, in all regions, in all industries. We are currently more focused on the fintech area, financial sector, where we think that through technology you can incorporate people that for a long time have been away of that market. You can distribute better, have lower cost, more efficiency. So certainly there are many opportunities there. In the insurance sector as well, car insurance, for instance, so far hasn't had lots of changes in this region. And I think that you can have dynamic insurance for your car. So depending on how you drive, how often you do it, you can certainly pay different rates. Same with health insurance. There are some companies outside of the region that are already showing some dynamic prices. The other day we were talking at the office with Andy about a company that if you can run a mile in less than 8 minutes, the cost of that insurance goes down by 25%. And that's because of technology, because of big data and the analysis that they can do around the risk profile of those people. So certainly there are lots of areas in that area, in that industry, also in health in general. There are opportunities, particularly for Argentina. We think that there's a big argument around agrotech, so technology for the agricultural industry. So certainly many areas where we think new companies will emerge in the next few years and hopefully will become the next unicorns. You mentioned just one final point. You mentioned digital house. We think that also in education there's an amazing opportunity and also a market that needs to change. Lots of people that need training, with a new mentality, with new skills, and I think that companies that like Digital House can really make a change there.
Yeah, and you have a very important low profile that's the opposite of the whole of deals you've been part. Tell us about Allen & Company. Tell us about your experience.
I joined Allen & Company 23 years ago. All right, I've spent the most of my career at Allen & Company. Allen & Company has been around since 1922. And today, we are a mixture of investment and advisor. So I spend about 20 to 25% of my time on investments, often at multi-stages, but generally focused within technology. The other part of my time I spend advising companies, sometimes selling small companies, sometimes advising large companies. The large company advisory work is focused on acquisition. So I represented, as you mentioned, Facebook in the acquisition of WhatsApp and Amazon in the acquisition of Twitch. But it's a family-owned business. It's a small business, about 165 people at Allen & Company. But we're long-term focused and relationship-oriented.
Mike, you've been part in 75 acquisitions. How was your experience, and how is the future of that business?
Well, you know, I joined this company called Cisco Systems, as you mentioned, back in 1994, and we had 500-600 employees back then. I was very lucky, and the company was very lucky, that that's really when the internet started to take off. So we had the benefit of enjoying the rise of the internet, and as most of you probably know, Cisco makes the devices that the internet works on. The part that's interesting about buying all these companies, why did we buy these companies? When you're in an environment where things are changing very quickly, your own internal innovation sometimes doesn't allow you to keep up with all of the changes. And the beautiful thing about Silicon Valley and what Silicon Valley does is it's like a small farm of all these innovation that's happening around you. And so what we did at the time really was quite simply to take advantage of the ecosystem that existed around Silicon Valley and added components of innovation and technology to Cisco, which over time grew, and we had a very large sales force that could sell those products. But really, we almost treated all of Silicon Valley and its innovation system as a breeding ground for our products. And it was a very effective growth strategy for the company at the time. I think now Cisco has bought over 200 companies, and something like 40% of the employees there come from companies that Cisco has acquired over time.
Hey, Mike, Jose, let me jump in a little bit there, because I think one of the things that seems different in Silicon Valley now is that in the era that you were at Cisco, as you said, innovation was happening outside of Cisco. It was happening in the ecosystem. I've heard a lot of people talk about how in the current environment we're in Silicon Valley, if you look at Google, Facebook, that much of the innovation is happening within the companies, right? So they're doing fewer acquisitions. They're only they have the resources, the bandwidth to attract some of the most talented engineers. If you look at AI and machine learning, a lot of that innovation seems to be happening inside. Do you see that as well? Obviously, there's innovation that continues to happen outside, but is it different?
Well, I would say if you kind of look at over time, companies that get bigger, historically you would say become less innovative. They rely more on the fact that they have a market share and a position, their incumbency. And they don't innovate as well as they used to once upon a time, and in order to compensate for that, they do acquisitions. I think today some of the bigger companies are doing quite amazing things, you know, whether it's Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple. These companies have found ways, and very important because this is a big departure from the past, of continuing to be innovative. But they do it not at the exclusion of acquisitions. They actually do acquisitions. Look at Microsoft and LinkedIn. Look at how many things Amazon has bought over the years. Look at Facebook acquiring Instagram and WhatsApp and see how important that's been. So now these big companies are becoming powerful and smart enough where they do both internal innovation, very effectively, and also they acquire. So it's not mutually exclusive. They do both. And it's one of the reasons why, I mean, you've been around this business, Santi, for a long time. I have never seen a period of time when there are so many large companies that are as effective as the ones that we see around us right now.
Just one small anecdote to show you who Mike Volpi is. I think today I met him for the first time, where I had heard his name over and over again for many years, and it was because I went to Stanford later, and when I was there, most of our classmates were working on business plans and trying to get their companies going, and for most of them, their exit strategy was Mike Volpi. Sell the company to him. So
they just saw a big wallet, you know, like dollars hanging out. That was me.
And here is he. So you have the opportunity. Santiago, let's talk about your experience. I mean, you have as one of your goals to visit 50% of the of the countries in the world.
It's full of Bitcoin.
And how is your experience now in Silicon Valley, where you live?
So, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's always great to come back to Argentina. I've been in Silicon Valley for 7 years now. It's going to be 8. My original plan was to stay there for 2 years and then come back. And when I spent a couple of days here talking to a lot of you and going out, having drinks and nice dinners, that's when I think, oh, maybe I should come back. So when I go back, I need to talk to my wife and see what she thinks. But it's been great. I mean, it's completely different how the ecosystem operates in Silicon Valley and Latin America. When I started the company here, there was not there was no Kaszek. I mean, there was no one there who was doing venture capital the way venture capital works in Silicon Valley. So when we started the company, we were doing a lot of professional services. That's how we funded the business. And once you start deviating from the path of building product, it's very hard to course correct. In Silicon Valley, the ecosystem is so rich, so innovative, that people support you, not just from capital, but we were talking about this. You have, if you need to hire a VP of marketing, VP of sales, you can hire someone who's done that 5 times at Salesforce, Google, Box, and you name it. So they know what to do. So that de-risks the opportunity significantly, and that's what I expect to see a lot more here in Latin America with all these companies like Mercado Libre, Despegar, Globant, with people who've been through those hyper-growth processes and might be thinking about starting or joining a smaller company. So I believe that in the next few years, we're going to see a lot more interesting companies growing faster and growing the right way.
Hernán, we have lots of entrepreneurs here, and how important is to have a good storytelling when they try to seduce investors like you are, like you are, like you are, like you are?
That's a tricky question, because for Argentinians, sometimes to say that you have to have a storytelling, they think you have to have chamullo.
Del Latin,
that is not the case. What it means is you have to be able to tell in a very short period of time, with lots of consistency, with lots of kind of an easy flow, what you're trying to do, why what you're trying to do will be successful, why you're going to be able to accomplish that vision that you have. So I would say it's very, very important, and it's something that doesn't come out naturally out of our culture, out of our educational system. So when we work with companies, that's one of the areas where we try to help them a lot. Sometimes you have an entrepreneur that inside his head, inside her head, they know what they want to do, they know how to do it, they have lots of answers to many questions, but then when they try to articulate that vision, it falls short of what they are really trying to accomplish. So I think it's very, very important. And again, we don't end up making decisions because of the storytelling. We end up making decisions because of the person. We invest in people. But certainly, it's a very important skill.
So I would add to that, for me and for what we do at Emergence, a lot is about storytelling. I mean, we're early stage investors, so there's not a lot more than storytelling. And storytelling can help you not only raise capital, but it can also help you recruit the great people. It can help you get the right customers. It can help you potentially take the company public and talk to investors. So I would say early on when you're raising your seed round, I would say probably 100% is storytelling. There's nothing that you've built that could justify the valuation that you're going to get. As you're raising your Series A, I'd say it's probably like 60% storytelling and 40% some kind of product. And then as you start maturing, I would say it's still about 30, 40% storytelling. And I would back a great storyteller over someone who's like deeply technical and can build stuff, but then can't recruit the right team.
Ian?
I was going to make the same point that Santi was making, that I see it at a much later stage, right? So I invest early, and it's true that storytelling is a pre-indicator of your success, attracting a team, attracting capital, going public, selling the company. There are circumstances, there are examples of people who are horrible storytellers that still build great businesses. So Jan Koum from WhatsApp is not a storyteller. He is a grumpy,
a liar,
internally focused, not interested in telling stories, just interested in executing. Yet he built one of the most important companies in the world.
But I would say those are rare. Most of the successful entrepreneurs are great storytellers, and we have a number of them here, and it's amazing. I mean, you can have like awesome dinners because they're telling you amazing stories, not just about the company. Because a lot of it is about building relationships, and it's not just, oh, here's my PowerPoint, and this is what I'm going to do. You're investing in people.
So they have to convince you.
Yeah. And they have to convince you that you want to work with them, not just for a month, a year, but you're signing up into a partnership that's harder to break than a marriage. So you need to be committed to that.
Mike, it's important to know, why do you think Silicon Valley investors are not investing enough in Latin America?
Well, I think what Silicon Valley investors tend to look for are companies that have a very broad transformative effect across a wide part of the world, a big geography. And one of the challenges that I think a lot of companies that are not based in the United States or not based in Silicon Valley have is that they tend to focus quite a bit on their local market. My firm, Index Ventures, does about half of its investing in Europe. And many of our companies in Europe have this problem where they say, like, oh, I'm a Spanish company and I'm going to go and do super well in the Spanish market for insurance. And that's kind of interesting. Or you find Italian companies serving the Italian market or French companies serving the French market. Silicon Valley investors won't respond well to that. Silicon Valley investors look for companies that have global aspirations. They can come from anywhere, for sure. But they have to have global aspirations because they serve a very large market. Now, that doesn't mean that all entrepreneurship has to do this. I'm not saying this is a recipe for successful. I'm just saying this is what Silicon Valley investors look for. And the country actually that has probably mastered that most well is Israel, where Israeli companies tend to have a lot of success, but from day one, they're thinking about going after the US market, going after the global market. And then that's a recipe that at least Silicon Valley investors can appreciate and understand.
But Jose, I'd like to make a small tweak to your question. I think the right question is why Silicon Valley investors are not investing early in Latin America. Because I agree with what Santiago was saying, that this ecosystem is much, much, much younger, and it's a completely different stage versus what you can see in the Silicon Valley. But our companies, the ones that do well and get to a certain stage, they do get funding from Silicon Valley investors. Our first fund, we invested roughly $80 million, and those companies raised $1.3 billion. And most of that capital came from Silicon Valley investors, but at a much later stage.
Yeah. Yes.
I just want to make the point that Silicon Valley investors typically don't like investing outside of Silicon Valley. Like, forget about Argentina. They don't like going to New York. They don't like going to Boston.
Actually, they don't like driving from San Francisco to San Jose.
Yeah. Now we are telling the truth. That's good.
Yeah, actually, I mean, this reminds me, when I joined Emergence back in 2010, I was interviewing with the founders there, and I asked them the question, so do you guys invest internationally? and they looked at me and it's kind of, what do you mean, LA? And it's like, okay, got it, thanks.
Tell us about the different mindsets. I mean, when you have a deal, 75 deals in the deals you were part.
What part of those deals?
For example, you have some experience from the owners and wanted to sell, some experience difficulties.
Well, I'd say the most important thing is that acquisitions, mergers and acquisitions happen, for sure, and sometimes they're lucrative for the entrepreneurs. But I don't think entrepreneurs should build businesses to sell them. You know, the thing that you look for in an entrepreneur is somebody that wants to make a great business, and sometimes that great business finds an exit point in M&A, but typically if I find an entrepreneur, this is true when I worked for Cisco or even now that I'm an investor, if I find an entrepreneur who says, you know, I'm building this business because I'm going to sell it, I get a lot less interested. When somebody says, I'm building a business because I believe in this business, it has a great vision, it's going to do great things, I get much more interested. So,
but you were the dream, I mean, from Hernán to the exit strategy when he started. I mean, I think you are part of that investors.
Yeah, no, we were happy and we're obviously as an investor, like several of my portfolio companies have been sold and I'm perfectly happy to have them sold, but I don't think that should be the primary motivation. Santi, same thing for you.
I totally agree. And actually what I've experienced, so I've been doing this for about 7-8 years now, it's companies don't get sold, companies get bought. If companies are getting sold, it's not going to be a good outcome for most of the people. If companies get bought, then it might be a good outcome. And that's, I mean, you asked about the entrepreneurial mindset. And what I see most of the companies that are trying to raise capital in Silicon Valley coming from Latin America, because I'm one of the few who speak Spanish. And a lot of them, from the get-go, they're thinking that they're going to build a company that's, I mean, success story. I'm going to sell this company for $30 million, $50 million, $100 million. And even though that might be a great outcome for the founders, for funds the size our funds, that doesn't work. I mean, the basic math is if you're investing out of a $200 million fund and you're going to own on average 20% in each of the companies that you invest in, you want to believe that each of the companies can at least return the entire fund. That means that at least you need a $1 billion exit. Anything short of that could be okay, but that's not what you're shooting for.
And then this is part of the end of one stage, but where is the beginning of the best talent? Where is the beginning of that idea?
I think the very beginning goes back to people and his character. I think what we look into an entrepreneur is strong character, and character means lots of things. It means leadership, as my colleagues here were saying, that you can sell your vision, you can convince others to join your vision, you can convince users or customers to use your product. So long-term vision, again, what we were just saying, when someone has a dream, but that dream lasts 5 years, then it's not a long dream. And maybe it ends up happening that in a 5-year window, you can exit your business, but sometimes you need 15 years. And if you are just looking for that exit, you will not have the kind of energy, drive that needs to be in place to execute a vision, to create a company, to attract a high caliber team. So I would say first is character. Character comes from experiences, from education, from lots of areas. Clearly thinking about Argentina, I think that character comes from culture, and we have, as Pancho Cabrera was saying earlier, we have a positive angle from it because we are an entrepreneurial country, but at the same time, we lack some of those long-term values that we need to recover to try to create a new class of entrepreneurs that are going to build the next unicorns. That's what we at Kaszek try to do, and hopefully I think that we will start seeing that new cohort of entrepreneurs emerging in the next few years.
Santi.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask Ian a question, and I've been thinking about this during this panel. in Latin America, we're great at building relationships. I mean, building relationships. We're great at building relationships in Latin America. We care about people. We want to get to know other people. We don't go out for dinner just to eat and then we're gone. We just spend hours talking about stuff. And you guys have this big conference, Sun Valley, where you bring in the brightest minds in the world just to foster those relationships. And when you think about building a company, getting a customer, hiring someone, potentially selling the company, it's not about the transaction or just about the transaction. So how do you think about this relationship? Should people invest early on in these relationships, or should they just go to Silicon Valley, try to raise money and come back?
So, look, you can think about it in capital raising and you can think about it in M&A. And the number of companies that come to me, because I sell companies all the time, and say, the board has decided, I have decided now is the time to sell the company. And I'll say, okay, why do you think that? Well, because the business is doing this and I have these other things I want to do. And I'll look at them and I'll say, that's a horrible reason to decide now is the time to sell the company. Time to sell the company is when someone shows up on your door and says, I want to partner with you, we want your capabilities, I want to buy your company. Then we can have a discussion about how you manage a process and sell a company. But to get to that position where someone knocks on your door and says, I want to buy your company, it takes years of relationship building, right? And relationship building does a couple things. One, it lowers the discount rate at which people, the risk profile associated with them buying your business. Because if they've known you for 2 years or 3 years and you've told them you're going to do X, Y, and Z and you've done most of it, then they're going to believe you in terms of what you say in the future. The other thing is most technology companies are not sold on the basis of profits and the past. They're sold on the promise of the future. And so having credibility in a relationship where they know that you will work well with them, that you will stay for 3 or 4 years often is what they hope. They're not hoping that you stay for a year and then go and do something else. Having those relationships are just very practically lower the risk profile. Now, the way we do business at Allen & Company, people are the most important to us. We're not market share oriented. We don't market. We don't try. We don't have a website. We are a word-of-mouth organization, and for me, a life in business is about the people I'm in business with. And to me, that's just the more satisfying way of doing business. I don't care that I miss a deal or don't do a deal. If it's a person I don't care about, if it's a person I care about, I'll be very upset if I'm not involved. But to me, that's just that's an approach to life, an approach to business that fits with the type of people that end up working at Allen & Company.
We are almost out of time, but it's important to know about the future. You know, we already talked about the beginning, but when we think about the future, which are the most important transformations that you find in global business, Mike?
Well, the most fascinating thing I find in the world of startups and so forth, there's some underlying technologies that everybody's talking about these days that are very exciting, like artificial intelligence and machine learning and so on and so forth. But I'll tell you what I find most interesting is that, you know, I joined this business world in the technology space in the early 90s. And at the time, technology was something that were basically computers that you sold to IT departments somewhere in a big company. That's what it was. If you look at what technology is today, it's transforming every aspect of industry in the world. It's transforming how food gets to your house. It's transforming how you move from one location to another, where you stay. It's transforming the insurance business, the financial services business, and so forth. So what I find most interesting is how the internet and technology has allowed the spread of transformational businesses in every single little corner of the world. This morning, I'll tell you this funny story. This morning I got an email from somebody that wants to reinvent funeral homes with technology.
Wow.
So when you get to funeral homes, you've definitely reached every end of the world. And I would say for all the entrepreneurs to think about places that technology has not permeated and think about how technology can be transformative to that corner of the world, because there's many, many corners of the world that are actually very large markets that have yet to be transformed.
The funeral home, they're targeting specific age ranges, because I didn't get that one.
Tell us about your opinion, Santi.
So we look at a lot of B2B opportunities. We invest in companies like Salesforce, Yammer, Box, Zoom, and many others. So for us, it's all about B2B. And where I see a great opportunity, and I expect to see a lot coming out, not just from the US, is in what we call deskless workers. And that's basically this notion that most of the productivity applications were created for people sitting in front of a computer. I mean, that's the Salesforces of the world, the ERPs of the world. It's just people sitting in front of the computer. Now, most workers are going to have a computer in the form of a mobile device, and that's 4 billion workers in the world. And they don't have any productivity apps designed for them. So I believe that that's going to create companies bigger than Salesforce that are targeting this new deskless workforce. And I'm pretty excited about that.
Hernán?
Well, looking at this big picture, one big thing that is changing is around ownership, how you own things, who owns things. The typical example, first one is of Airbnb, so you own a part of a house, or Uber, you own a part of a car. But then it's happening in many other aspects, like with electricity and energy, as wind energy or solar energy starts to gain scale at a very small case. You can start having been the owner of energy versus having a huge utility being the owner of that. In the financial industry, well, what I described at the beginning, I think ownership is changing. It used to belong to the banks, and it was impossible to think that could change. And now I think it's belonging more to like the Mercado Libres, the Amazons, companies that have data, that have a direct connection with users. Production is changing. Production, again, was associated with big companies, and now with 3D printing and many other things, it's changing. Lots of small companies being enabled by new technologies to start mass production with a very small scale. So I think that changes around ownership, looking at it as a big overlying concept. I think it's amazing.
Ian, your conclusion?
So we invest in people, right? But they're often people that are attacking opportunities where there's massive change. And so 4 years ago, we were founding investors in Wences company, right? Bitcoin, blockchain, it was a passionate entrepreneur, a person we loved, and who was intent on changing the world. The last investment I made was about a year ago, and it was applied AI, applied machine learning, but in the automotive space. It was a man who developed the Google self-driving car, 7 years at Google, and created his own company. But again, a person I love. And so for me, finding people that have a place in my heart, but who are also talented in changing the world, is what I look for. So there's a trend behind it, but for me it's much more personal.
Un panel de lujo el que hemos tenido. Fíjense lo que decía él, es así de cierto. Cuando uno se prepara para estas entrevistas, buscas los perfiles, buceas, hay muy poca información de la gente que es la que cierra las operaciones más grandes a nivel internacional. Recorrimos la proyección de Argentina para invertir, y ahí tengan en cuenta que si quieren que invierta alguien de Silicon Valley, ya les dijeron, tómense el avión, suban a un taxi allá y díganle acá estamos, o aprovechen mientras están aquí en Buenos Aires. También lo importante de las transformaciones que sigue pesando en términos de personas, las salidas que hay de las empresas, a donde en la Argentina todavía el tamaño no es suficiente como para tener tantas salidas como hay en otros países. La importancia de una buena historia, pero lo dijeron sutilmente, políticamente correcto, lo importante no es tener una buena historia, que sí es clave para que te inviertan, pero también que esa historia tenga sustento y cohesión con el proyecto que ustedes manejan. El comienzo está en el talento, lo decía, el comienzo del futuro, y como cierre también, todos coincidieron en cada una de las partes, independientemente de la transacción, que aquel que le mueve solamente el dinero, solo el dinero para salir de una empresa, nunca va a ser invertido. Aquel que lo mueve la pasión de hacer algo distinto y algo global, y aquí tienen una oportunidad. Muchas gracias. Gracias.
Muchas gracias. Chicos, ustedes por acá. Hernán, por acá. Thank you. Ok, gracias a todos. Bueno, seguimos. Quiero presentar ahora sí a Reid Hoffman y a Wences Casares, por favor. Gracias, Wences. Gracias por estar acá hoy.
Gracias
en el
a
medio,
vos.
siéntense, ¿sí? Gracias, Reid. Gracias.
Welcome to Buenos Aires, Reid. Thank you for coming here.
It's awesome to be here.
I like that you've been surprised at the entrepreneurial fervor in Buenos Aires.
Well, it's not completely surprised because even in Silicon Valley, we know how interesting the entrepreneurship is here.
Yeah, but I was very proud when I saw that you travel all over the world and you were like, wow, there's so much interest around this in Buenos Aires. It's always been the case and it keeps getting more so. In Silicon Valley, it's very hard, if not impossible, to find someone who's from Silicon Valley. You're almost from Silicon Valley, grew up in Berkeley, but you went to school in Vermont. How come?
Well, a friend of mine who I was going to school with at the first year of high school had told me that he was going to go to a boarding school the next year, and I was like, wait, you could get out of the house and be independent? Was this actually in fact something possible?
How old were you?
I was 13 at the time. And so I then quickly researched, this is the summer before my sophomore year in high school, I quickly researched kind of what boarding schools were and which one were interesting boarding schools. And I realized the Putney School, which is in Vermont, would be interesting. It was on a farm, and you'd learn to drive oxen and maple syrup farming and blacksmithing and all this other stuff. And I was like, I'm going to apply and I'm going to get in, or I anticipated getting in, and I did. And then I would then go to my parents and say, oh, by the way, I'd like to go to a new school next year. This was literally August, where I would be going in September. And it's a good thing. And so my dad was like, sure, whatever school. And I was like, great. And then he was like, where is it? Because he was thinking, I was like, Vermont. He's like, okay, let's talk about this. And then so I went to high school in Vermont for 3 years.
Did you drive oxen?
I have, yes.
Wow, I'm impressed.
Once.
So, you know, you're very well known for being one of the founders of PayPal, for being the founder of LinkedIn, for having invested in Facebook, invested in Airbnb, now for being in the Microsoft board. You're very well known for all of those successes. What was SocialNet about?
So SocialNet was my very first entrepreneurial experience, and it was one of those things where you say, well, it was a learning experience, and usually when someone tells you it's a learning experience, it's, you know, how many scars do you have? How much blood did you leave on the floor? You know, and it was intense. And it was one of those things where literally at the end of every week or two, I could have told you things that I wish I had known at the beginning of the week. And because you're just like running over landmines constantly. And one of the things, of course, you learn as you become an experienced entrepreneur is to run over those landmines, but do it at a high velocity, because then maybe the landmine only gets you at the, you know, clips you at the end because you're moving so far past it. And part of the idea was, you know, it was a similar kind of idea to what brought about LinkedIn, which is the internet's going to create a social platform by which we reorganize these really key in-person relationships.
Year?
This was 1997, right? And that these set of relationships are actually, in fact, part of what transform work, transform social life, transform experience. But there were all kinds of things that I had gotten wrong. So like for example, our initial idea, which was kind of this classic, back then Internet 1.0 idea, was we were going to partner with newspapers and magazines and so forth in order to launch. And one of the things that's actually really key when you're thinking about internet ideas is to have your own unique organic distribution. And to give you an example of the kind of landmines we did is we put all this energy into partnering with newspapers. And so we partnered with this Arizona State newspaper that the number of users that we got in the first week was 4. And literally, when I was reviewing it and talking to the team, I said, look, this was such a bad idea. If literally we'd taken the whole team, including the engineers, and literally just taken the Phoenix phone book and called people at random, we would have gotten many more signups, in the same amount of time that we put in all this thing. So you always have to think about that. And that's part of what the kind of the first learning experiences were, because basically 90% of the learnings that I had from SocialNet were mistakes, were failures that you went, okay, change that, do that differently. And so SocialNet was enormously valuable as learning experiences. It's part of what enabled, kind of the strategies around LinkedIn. It was part of what enabled the learnings that allowed me to invest in things. But basically, if I look back at the time and energy that went into SocialNet, it was almost always a list of failed at that, didn't have that idea, ran over that landmine. But all those failures become learning experiences. And so one of the things that when people, frequently from Silicon Valley say, look, we really respect failure, they're not actually saying you want to fail, because obviously you always want to succeed, but it's the learning. And so the really key thing is learning. And so, for example, people say, well, you invest in people whose previous startup failed. And I was like, yeah, but that's fine, because the question you then ask is, what did you learn? And if you're learning the right things and have the right kind of learning curve, then that makes you a much higher probability of successful entrepreneur.
How did that experience in SocialNet lead to PayPal?
So Peter Thiel and I had known each other since we were undergraduates. Especially, of course, in the current political climate, it's kind of an entertaining thing to say, which is he had heard there was this guy who was I think it was a pinko commie, that was me, and I had heard that there was this guy who was right wing of Attila the Hun, that was him, and so we'd heard about each other. And so when we ended up in a philosophy class together, we're like, oh, wait, I've heard of you, we'll talk, and we argued constantly. And so I wanted entrepreneurship first. I was doing SocialNet, and I was talking to Peter, literally, like we'd get together for dinner every couple of weeks, and I go, oh my God, there's all these things I learned. And so when Peter decided, along with Max Levchin, that he was going to found PayPal, he came to me and he said, look, Max and I have decided that we're going to each have one of our closest friends who can help us on the board. And so I'd like you to be the PayPal board member for pulling this together. And I was like, great, I'd be happy to help. What's the idea? And he said, well, it's an encryption technology on mobile phones. And I said, well, that's a terrible idea and it's never going to work, but I'll help you, right, because you're my friend. And he's like, oh, great, can you sit down and meet Max? And Max and I are also now friends. And, of course, it's always a great first meeting when you have with an entrepreneur, because your ideas are your babies. And it's like, your idea is terrible, it's never going to work. It's a little bit like saying your baby's ugly. So the first conversation was great, because Max is intellectually rigorous and wants to talk about these things. And it turns out, of course, I was right that encryption on mobile phones was not actually, in fact, the interesting idea about PayPal. But I started as a founding board member. And then a little later, one of the things that happened, and was just a whole set of different failure points and learning at SocialNet. One of the failure points that I'd made at SocialNet was that part of how to look at investors is essentially financial co-founders, people who will startups always go through a valley of the shadow. They always go through a period where you were like, almost always, 99.9%, but like almost always, like, why did we think this was a good idea? Right? This is a disaster. We're all going to die. And so you want people who go through that valley of the shadow with you. And back then, my first startup, I was like, oh, you just get a high brand VC and you have someone who has a big resume. No, you want a partner who's in the foxhole with you. And so my VCs, unfortunately, were not that sort of thing. And so we were having, in addition to learning, we were having all these problems. And so I eventually decided I was going to leave because working with the VCs was too difficult. They thought, for example, like we had this argument at the board where like, all we need to do is television advertising and the company will be successful. I was like, no, that's a terrible idea. We actually need to reboot the company. We need to pivot. And they're like, no. And I was like, all right, fine. And I was going to go start another company. I roughly had the LinkedIn idea at the time. And when I went to tell Peter and Max, because I was on the board, they were like, no, don't do that yet. Come help us with PayPal. And so I, in January of 2000, stepped off the PayPal board and joined PayPal full-time as an executive.
To me, it's crazy to think of a startup like that with you, Peter Thiel, Max Levchin, and Elon Musk all getting started together. It's crazy.
It was a crazy crew. Now, part of this goes back to 2000. So, amongst Peter's moment of genius and brilliance was that he had understood exactly how crazy the financial market was around the internet then, because at that time, PayPal, which was losing money on every transaction, so it had negative gross margins in every transaction, had a early exponential growth rate, and its business model was clearly, like if you could do math, you could understand its business model didn't work, right? So it was like clearly like, now that we had so much financial interest in investing in the company, we ended up doing $100 million at a $500 million pre, but we had investors who were doing the following kind of thing, which was like this Korean group basically discovered our bank account number, I don't know how they did that, wired us money, and then said, you have to let us invest because we've wired you the money, right? And you're like, oh my God, things are crazy. And so Peter countered my advice, because I was like, well, let's just raise the price, put more money in the company. He's like, no, we're going to close. We're going to take the money, we're going to close. This market is going to die any day now. And literally, Peter closed that financing the day that the NASDAQ peaked. It started down the very next day, and that's when the whole internet winter started. And that was part of the craziness of what was going on at the time. And part of the reason why you get this crew of people like Peter and Max and Elon kind of all working together on this was that very clearly from February of 2000 and on, it was quite clear that most of the internet companies were all going to crater, and that you had to focus on the ones that were going to had a chance of actually creating something that would continue to exist. And so despite wide diversions in political views, wide differences in working, for example, Elon was a huge fan of a different technology stack. Like all of these differences, we all pulled together and rode together in order to.
Because you guys had nowhere else to go.
Nowhere else to go, and by default we were dead, right? So like in August 2000, we burned $10 million, right? Net burn, $10 million out the door. And as I was explaining, and this was exponentiating, and as I was making it real to Peter and a group of people, I said, look, if the entire executive team stood on the roof and was throwing wads of $100 bills off the roof as fast as we could, we wouldn't spend money as fast as we are right now.
It may sound crazy to you that someone wired money to your bank account, to the company bank account, without even asking you, but it happens to these entrepreneurs here all the time.
Well, it's not crazy for them, but it's crazy for the people who are doing it.
Tell that story when you were leaving PayPal at 11 p.m. one night, and Peter stopped.
So I had many fun conversations with Peter at PayPal. One of them was I was leaving, and I told this story in part to Wences at another time because it plays to the whole kind of revolution that is Bitcoin and all the rest. which was, I was leaving PayPal, and Peter said, hey, Reed, I want to talk to you for a minute. I'm like, okay, sat down. He's like, you know, I'm not really sure why you work here. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. What's the next 3 sentences? He's like, well, you know our secret plan. And I'm like, okay, still don't understand. Next 3 sentences? He's like, well, you know, PayPal is going to create the next currency, and that's going to end the final control that governments have over the economies, because it's their control of currencies which really control things. And PayPal is going to liberate, you know, entrepreneurs and the markets and everything else, because we're going to create the new currency. And I was like, oh, yes, I'm aware of that secret plan. Now, Peter, remember, you and I were in the room when a small group of us made the decision that we weren't going to have Beans, which was another company at the time, or Flues, which was another company at the time, or PayPalians, which was one of the things we talked about. We were going to trade in US dollars. So I'm working at a master merchant that is facilitating the global use of US dollars. I don't know what company you're working at, right? But I'm perfectly happy working at the company I'm working at, so I'll see you tomorrow.
What year was that roughly?
That was 2000.
Maybe Peter is Satoshi?
Well, he has the brain power.
Yeah, he has the brain power. There was a lot of, any of those 4 could be Satoshi.
Yes, exactly.
How did PayPal lead to LinkedIn?
I had a bunch of different roles at PayPal. I was generally Peter's fixer. So one of the things that I was sometimes referred to in PayPal off the movie Pulp Fiction was the Wolf, the Harvey Keitel character. And so one of the things that gradually evolved into is I was in charge of everything that was a strategic significance that was outside the building. Because we had to deal with Visa and MasterCard and banking regulations and government relations and international and all the rest of the stuff. And so one of the things was dealing with eBay. And so facilitating the sale to eBay, which was let me put it this way, we could take this entire interview and talk about the 4 different negotiations we had between PayPal and eBay about that transaction. And so, because for various reasons, which you can follow up if you want to, and say like I actually think that the transaction had to happen for selling PayPal to eBay, and it's the only way that PayPal would have gotten to the place it is today. And so we went through all that, we sold it, and then I was originally planning on taking a year off, because it was like PayPal was like most of these intense entrepreneurial journeys was just 100+ hours a week. Like you were working at Sunday at 2 o'clock because you were working through the weekend making stuff happen. You basically took Friday and Saturday nights off, right? That was your kind of recharge, and everything else was working. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take time off, and I went down to visit during the time that the deal was closing between PayPal and eBay. I went down to visit a friend of mine in Sydney, Australia. And then what I realized when I was down there and had a couple moments to think was that Silicon Valley had gone crazy, that they had thought that the consumer internet was over. And the reason they thought it was over, this was an old pattern for decades in Silicon Valley, which is there's a gold rush around a particular technology. It could be optical semiconductors, it could be enterprise software, it could be networking equipment. And this was the gold rush. And then you try to make all your bets, and then the great companies are built, then the other companies fail or emerged and all the rest, and then the next technology wave, and you start looking for the next technology wave. And so they had presumed that the internet through the internet winter was over. And so they were looking at maybe enterprise software or clean tech. And I was like, oh my gosh, the consumer internet is actually just beginning. Like that was the first wave, but the next waves will be just as important. And so I was like, I can't take the year off that I'd been planning on taking. And so I went back and decided what I was going to do was invest in a bunch of consumer internet companies and then start LinkedIn. And it was that and part of the ability that even though VCs had all gone, like I probably couldn't have gotten a meeting even with a PayPal background to say, oh, I have this idea for a product, because they were so like, oh, consumer internet's over. but I could use the money that I made from PayPal to build the first version and have the product before I'd go in and talk with them. And that's part of how PayPal led into LinkedIn.
And more or less around that time too, you made that first investment in Facebook. Can you tell us how that happened?
So that was actually, I think it was 2004. And part of what had happened is I'd built a friendship with Sean Parker, who at that time was the CEO and founder of Plaxo. And Plaxo he'd left Plaxo, and he had tripped across Facebook because he was looking for a room to rent, and the Facebook people were renting a house, because when Dustin and Zuckerberg and so forth Dustin Moskovitz had thought, oh, we should go build this, let's go out to Silicon Valley for the summer. They were planning on going back to Harvard the next year. So there was that summer, they were out there, and so Sean came to me and said, oh, I've got this great investment for you. You should invest in this thing called Facebook. I was like, oh, I already know about it, but it's based in Boston. I couldn't help them. They're like, no, they're here. They're in a house here. It's like, oh, yes, we'd love to do that. And so then when I thought it through a little bit more, and I'd also led the Series A in Friendster, and I was like, look, it's really important not only to have integrity, but to appear to have integrity is seriously important. And so I was worried that people would say, oh, you're having your cake and eating it too, because you're both investing in leading Facebook and you're doing LinkedIn. So I said, look, I'll follow, but Peter should lead this investment. So let's have them meet Peter and do that, and then I'll be in the room and help kind of think through the investment and everything else, but we know we want to invest already. One of the funniest part of that conversation was when, and I guess it was Peter who brought this up. Maybe it was also Zuckerberg on the whole Masters of Scale podcast that I'm doing. But one of them brought it up on one of the interviews, which was that Zuck had said two funny things in that interview. One was, I have this other startup idea, Wirehog, which is this peer-to-peer, like Napster-like thing. And we're like, no, Facebook good, get rid of that, right? And then two was, he's like, well, and Dustin and I are planning on going back to Harvard. And I'm like, no, that's not how you do a financial pitch. You're going to stay doing Facebook. We guarantee it. He's like, well, we're going to go back to Harvard. I'm like, no, you're going to, and clearly he didn't go back to Harvard. So.
You mentioned in passing Masters of Scale, the podcast. Tell us more. It's an incredible resource for entrepreneurs. I highly recommend it. I think we are all better off because you took time to do that.
Well, so the funny thing is, so I'm working on a book called Blitzscaling, which my publisher now for the last couple of months, we have a complete manuscript, has been like saying, can you just please give it to us so we can publish it? And we're, let's try to make it a little better, right? And it's actually one of the things you and I are going to be talking about over the next couple of days. And so I was working on that, and I taught a class on it at Stanford, all of which is available online, where I had interviews with Reed Hastings and Brian Chesky and Marissa Meyer and other folks on this. And because I had done that class, June Cohen, who's the former executive producer of TED, came to me and said, well, we're creating, we have some new ideas for this new way of doing podcasts. Would you like to do this podcast? And I really had no idea what she had in mind, because I was like, oh, you want me to sit down with some of the people I'm planning on sitting down with anyway? You know, Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg and Diane Green and Brian Chesky and so forth. And I'm going to sit down with them and talk to them about the book anyway to get stuff. And you want me to just record it and then release it to everyone? Sure, that sounds great. It would be helpful to entrepreneurs and so forth. And so I started doing some interviews, and then she came back and said, okay, here's how I want the episode to work. And the episode had original music, right, and had, and I was like, oh, and actually I'm going to be talking a lot more because I'm going to be stitching together a bunch of different comments. Like, okay, I'll do all that. But we also have to release the one-on-ones too, because it's a rare treat to have I think it was a 70-minute interview with Zuckerberg, where one of the funny things was that after we finished the interview, his staff came up and said, oh, that was really great. We were taking notes because we never have the time to ask him those questions, wow. Right? And so, And so it's, you know, it's part of trying to, you know, entrepreneurship is so hard. It's one of the metaphors that I use for it is you're jumping off a cliff and assembling an airplane on the way down. So sharing this information about like what are the key lessons, the do's and the don'ts, and what are the things that are mindsets or techniques or principles about how to operate or how to learn faster are really key to being successful entrepreneurs. And so that was part of the reason why I'd agreed to do it, and part of the reason we're now in, we just started a couple weeks ago releasing season 2, which is Stuart Butterfield and Diane Green and Peter Thiel, who was the first episode. That was about some of the PayPal stories.
Where do we find it?
It's if you on iTunes, Masters of Scale or Reid Hoffman will both search will get you there, and then also Stitcher, and basically any place there is podcasts. If you look for Masters of Scale, it should be there.
There is no mastersofscale.com?
There is a mastersofscale.com too. Maybe they want me to start saying that now too.
You should say that. So you're friends with Elon.
Yes.
What are his thoughts in the Robocalypse, and how do they compare with your? What do you agree and disagree with him on the Robocalypse?
Well, I keep trying to persuade him to stop saying Robocalypse because I think that roughly speaking, the highlighting the negative, the call for regulation, so forth, means that there's a higher likelihood of negative outcomes, where there's possibilities of hugely positive outcomes. So let's just, for the first thing, deal with negative outcomes. So there are many risks in the world, and we as human beings tend to have failure of induction. So like, for example, most people think, well, maybe right now with the US and North Korea, people are now thinking about nuclear war again. But most people think, oh, nuclear war is never going to happen because it hasn't happened. It's like, well, actually, in fact, there's still a big nuclear risk, and it's still something we need to manage. And just because it hasn't happened from 1947 to now, right, doesn't mean that there isn't actually, in fact, serious issues. And so now, one of the other big risks that's coming is synthetic biology, where essentially, you know, either by accident or by terrorism or anything else, there could be humanity-level risk from synthetic biology. Now, artificial intelligence is the best possible offset to the synthetic biology risk. So this is part of where not only are there a bunch of interesting proactive opportunities, but when you think about it, you say we have a naturally evolving contagion, or say we have something that is an accidental byproduct, the ability to recognize it early, craft a cure or a vaccine or anything else to it, all of that, the speed at which that would need to operate will all be because we've had advances in artificial intelligence technology along with synthetic biology. So that's amongst the ways of understanding that in balance, it's a hugely positive asset relative to how much threat does it add and how much opportunity does it add. It's in balance a lot more opportunity. Yep. Now, and then you get to everything from, you know, the question of how it's going to transform industries, precision medicine, education, autonomous vehicles. Ian was talking about up here, which is, you know, an application of artificial intelligence. And so I myself am, I describe myself as a techno-optimist versus a techno-utopian. So it's not that you don't have to put in a lot of energy to shape the technological impacts and things to make sure that they get to the right kinds of outcomes, and that there are risks that you need to pay attention to, but it's like the possibilities are really amazing, and you want to steer when you the framework that I think about these really important technologies, artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, et cetera, is there's utopic futures and dystopic futures, and you want to do the set of things that increase all the probabilities of the utopic futures and decrease dystopic futures. And that's what my fundamental view within artificial intelligence is. So, you know, one of the things I think I'm probably going to have dinner with Elon next month. We usually have dinner every 2 months. And I may actually suggest to him that maybe the two of us should go on some television show and debate. And we'll see if that's a good idea.
Don't record the first one. It can be scary until you know the outcome of the debate.
No, it's fun.
Are we going to do questions? Great. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Why don't you do one last one while they're...
A lot of the people who are listening to you today are entrepreneurs, and you've been part of, you did this process twice at LinkedIn where you looked for a new CEO. So you've been founder, CEO, you've been chairman, and you helped find a successor. What did you learn in that process?
So for several decades in the Valley, the model was, this is around like, enterprise level, semiconductors and networking equipment and enterprise software and so forth. The model was the entrepreneur is a starter, and then you hire professional management, and that scales. And so that has been the model that was back then. And then what happened is people realized that that wouldn't work in a certain set of companies as well, like the internet. And so it swung all the way to, no, you just have to invest in founders who will always be the CEO. And part of what I came to realize when I was looking at this myself is that the key thing, and I wrote an essay on this that's on LinkedIn, or readhoffman.org. I think it's on both places, thinking of Masters of Scale. What I realized was the pattern is the way that you as entrepreneurs or investors should think about, should I hire a CEO, is to say, there are actually multiple moments of founding and refounding companies as they go through their life cycle. Some of it is, to partner with investors as thinking of them as financial co-founders, who are not in 100 hours a week and everything else, but people who would partner with you both through the upsides and the downsides. But also, sometimes, we say, getting a company to massive scale the way that LinkedIn is, it's like, actually, in fact, there's other people who are much better at that, building the organization of scale, like Jeff Weiner. I learn a lot from him on this. I say, all right, how do you then hire someone to be a CEO? And the answer is, yes, you want a set of experience about scale of management and executive management, quote-unquote professional management. But what you're actually looking for is a later stage co-founder. You're looking for somebody who would also bleed the mission the way you would. I mean, not exactly the same way. There's things that Jeff prioritizes that I wouldn't prioritize, things that I'd prioritize that Jeff wouldn't prioritize, but would be with you as a co-founder. And that's one of the ways to think through as you're continuing to navigate and scale these companies, is to think through finding additional, essentially co-founders, and the CEO slot is an important part of that you would then bring in to help you with your journey. And, obviously Jeff and I partner very well because there's a bunch of stuff that, I learned from him on management, and then there's other things on, some parts of, network or marketplace strategy that, he works with me on, and I helped launch LinkedIn China and all the rest of that stuff.
Cool. Thank you very much. Yes, go ahead. First question.
Hello? Yes. Right. You mentioned that you are putting in your agenda the nuclear risk now, which seems to be relevant because of Korea. And another risk that you have in Silicon Valley is that Trump has decided not to import talent. So would you consider, I don't know whether you know a report that has been recently published, where Buenos Aires is the safest place in a nuclear scenario war. And so moving some of your capabilities of Silicon Valley to this part of the world just to hedge a little bit.
A funny question. So one way that I actually look at...
Crazy question.
One way that I look at the evolution of companies as they get through... and tech companies always stay a little bit more to the startup side of this, but you move from where, the metaphor I use, you throw yourself off a cliff, you assemble an airplane on the way down. Part of the reason for that metaphor is to understand that when you start a company, you're already default dead, right? Like, if you don't do anything, you just die, right? The financing, you're not a going concern, et cetera. So you have to get the plane assembled in order to be a going concern, and hopefully you're going to be a high flyer. That's again part of the reason why the plane. So in the early stages of the company, you're actually, in fact, not hedging at all. What you're trying to do is make the boldest, most coherent bet that you can for how you're going to make that plane fly and how you're going to make it work. And so when, like for example, an early stage, a Series A, Series B entrepreneur comes to me and says, well, I'd like to do the following thing to hedge. I'm almost always like, do not hedge, right? Play your bet, right? And your bet will work or won't work. And you may have plans B and you may have pivots in mind and so forth, but you're playing to make, you're aligning all your risks to your theory about how you're going to make a new product or service. Now, as you begin to grow a company into like a public market company and everything else, you then begin to have assets, and part of what you're also doing is managing its portfolio, you're managing, you know, persistence of value. You don't necessarily bet the whole company on everything you're doing, and you have a position. But generally speaking, more within the technology sphere, that reinvention is constantly important. What does the next 10 years look like? Because technology is changing at such a pace that if you don't go, you know, your Facebook, your LinkedIn, you don't go, mobile's really important, you're going to start dying. So you have to do mobile. You say, well, there's going to be a whole set of new services from artificial intelligence. If you're not saying, okay, well, what's the way that we can deploy artificial intelligence in a way that we continue to make moments of surprise and delight for our customers, we're also going to be relevant. So you don't hedge as much within this space. That's part of the thing. So even hedging on a you know, there's some North Korean video about propaganda part about how they can reach San Francisco, which obviously was a little dismaying to us in Silicon Valley. like, why are you focusing on San Francisco? Even with that, you wouldn't do that sort of hedge. Now, that being said, there's a great amount of entrepreneurial talent and companies and other kinds of things down here which deserve attention, financing, collaboration with. So I anticipate there will be more of that in the future.
Thank you.
And the waving your phone to, I see it. Yeah.
Like we talked in the previous panel, the entrepreneur ecosystem in Argentina is still in the early stages. So getting money might be trickier for entrepreneurs. So most people still have the 9-to-5 job. Do you think entrepreneurs can be successful being part-time entrepreneurs? Or do you think you have to be 100% committed in order to be a successful company?
Well, you're not going to be successful unless you get to being 100% committed. So there is no path to entrepreneurial success that doesn't ultimately lead to jumping off the cliff. The choice of when you jump off the cliff and how many people you have with you and how many resources you have that you're taking that jump with, that's an important decision. And you might say, well, you know, while we're working out the idea, we'll continue our job. And while we're building something to see if we can build it or prototype it or test it with customers, we might say, okay, we'll do that while keeping the financial stability. But fundamentally, if the plan as an entrepreneur, I think anywhere in the world, including here, and yes, the capital is trickier, it's easier in Silicon Valley, trickier here, and many other places in the world, and so you have to be much more careful about that capital, and it's difficult to have the raise. Ultimately, if the plan is, I'm going to completely de-risk this before I move from part-time to full-time, the answer is you're going to fail, right? I don't think that's ever succeeded anywhere that I've seen. You have to make that jump at some point. Now, you may make a decision of, oh, well, I'll de-risk these things. I'll get these people on board. I'll get, and for example, as an investor, whether it's here or Silicon Valley, if someone comes to me and says, well, I've got this really great idea that I'm working on the side and I haven't quit my own job in order to do it, then my judgment as an investor is, well, clearly you don't think it's that good of an idea because you didn't think it was worth your taking a risk to quit to do it. So why is it worth my putting in money and doing this journey with you? So it's a terrible pitch to be working on the side. So you ultimately have to get there. You just have to be, you know, there may be a set of choices about like, oh, I'll find a co-founder or I'll build this prototype, I'll test this customer experience as a way of making it work.
While we take the mic to the next question, I want to comment on that I think it's a huge fallacy that it is easier to raise money in Silicon Valley than here. The fact that there's more money available doesn't mean that it's easier to raise, sort of on the contrary. So I think that there's less money here, but there's less people competing for that capital. And
no other place in the world is more competitive for capital than Silicon Valley. So you'd be surprised. I think I know both markets fairly well, and I'm convinced that it's easier to raise money here than it is to raise in Silicon Valley. You may raise it in better terms if you can raise it in Silicon Valley, but you're more likely to raise here than in Silicon Valley. It's incredibly competitive. It's not a popular thing to say, but the other saying the opposite just feeds what, to me, is a fallacy.
Is there another question?
No more questions? No. All right.
No more questions? One more? One more.
Last question.
Hello. How does your philosophy background help you in your entrepreneurial journey?
It's funny because there's a meme a little bit going around about this because I deliberately kind of well, this is one of those great soccer, football countries of the world. I hip check MBA programs on occasion. So, like for example, when I'm giving talks at MBA programs, one of the things I mention is I say there are two negative factors that need to be explained away in order for me to do an investment. One is a background in management consulting, and the other one's an MBA for entrepreneurship, because MBA is counterproductive to the things that make entrepreneurs successful, which is they just go do it. They don't spend 2 years getting a credential and everything else is like, no, you get into it. And so there are successful entrepreneur MBAs, but the very impulse of going and getting an MBA. And so I said, look, in contrast, what you might be unexpected is my philosophy background has actually, in fact, really helped me with entrepreneurship in at least two significant ways. And one was the teaching of crispness of thinking about, like, for example, what is your strategic play? What is your investment thesis? What is the way that you're thinking that the world's going to become, and to be able to express that in a compact, here is the thesis that we're testing, here's what we're getting evidence against in terms of talking to people, launching products to market, and other kinds of things, such that we're refining and learning what our investment thesis is and how we're going to be successful. The second part of it is that when you're doing consumer internet companies especially, I mean, there's a broad sense in which all entrepreneurs are actually to some degree predictive anthropologists, because they're like, this is how we think our market's going to respond to my product or service. This is how I think, customers are going to interact with it. And especially on the consumer internet side, you're functioning with a theory of human nature, with a kind of a sense of kind of like, what do I think future people in interacting with the service and each other will look like. And philosophy also, while obviously there's a ton to learn from psychology and other disciplines, also of course on human nature, philosophy has this kind of a set of things that are kind of the perennial questions about what happens within, kind of how human nature reacts. And it was one of the things that when I was thinking about how philosophy is informed by investing, that also when I was trying to usually say this to classes of MBA students, is one of the things that I have said is that I invest in one or more of the 7 deadly sins, because those are things that scale within human nature. And so now, of course, you're trying to get positive, and evolution of humanity is the way of doing it. And then when people say, well, what is LinkedIn? Obviously, it's greed, right? You're investing in the way that you change your economic future. Now, there's an aspirational story to that too, but that's how you essentially do these triggers. And that kind of pattern of thinking, made crisp, made sharp, was one of the things that philosophy was very helpful to. And so the specific comment that I'd made was, that's been carried a little bit, is that philosophy was much more helpful than any MBA degree could be to being an entrepreneur.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here, Reid.
Thank you. Thank you. Gracias. Gracias, Wences. Gracias, Reid. Thank you so much. Sé que están muy apurados, quiero agradecerles muchísimo la posibilidad de haber tenido este gran evento de la mano de ustedes. Muchísimas gracias, sé que están sumamente apurados, tienen que tomar un vuelo rápidamente. Quiero invitar antes al ministro de Modernización, Innovación y Tecnología de la ciudad, Andy Freire, y a su equipo de Invest BA.
Ok, bueno, muchas gracias. Bueno, primero te dije que te iba a traer esto en persona. La legislatura reconoció a Wenceslao como uno de los emprendedores destacados de la Argentina, en realidad, pero de la Ciudad de Buenos Aires. La legislatura reconoce algunas personas cada año y, bueno, se hizo la entrega el Día del Emprendedor Porteño la semana pasada y Wenceslao no estaba y me dijo, bueno, atajame el diploma, así que ahora te lo doy en persona, así que te felicito. Muy merecido. Y solo quería hacer dos cosas. Una, presentarles al equipo de Invest BA, que es la agencia de inversiones de la Ciudad de Buenos Aires. Hasta hace un año no existía una agencia de inversiones en la Ciudad de Buenos Aires y creíamos que Buenos Aires merecía tener su propia agencia de inversiones porque tiene una agenda, si bien muy alineada con el gobierno nacional, un poco distinta en términos del trabajo que hacemos con emprendedores y también el trabajo que hacemos para conectarnos con el mundo. Y una de las creencias que tenemos acá con todo el equipo, con Agus, con Pablo y con Alejo, es que realmente la manera de reconectar a Argentina con el mundo es a través de los emprendedores, porque los emprendedores siempre son los que se mueven más rápido que los demás y siempre son los que están un paso adelante de lo que el resto de la gente hace. Entonces, desde ese punto de vista, se hicieron más de 50 eventos o misiones con emprendedores durante este año, hacia afuera o reversas de gente que vino hacia acá, y la invitación que queremos hacerles es a todos aquellos que estén queriendo conectarse con el mundo, que puedan ser parte de eso, que se acerquen a la agencia de inversiones y que puedan involucrarse de alguna forma para que podamos ayudarlos. Cada uno desde su lugar estamos creando una ola emprendedora para tratar de promover que haya más y mejores emprendedores en el país. Endeavor, a través de la ídola de Julia haciendo su trabajo, nosotros del lado del gobierno y los buenos emprendedores que nos van mostrando el camino. Así que muchísimas gracias a todos. Voy a hacer solo una pregunta de cierre, que es una pregunta que todo el mundo me dijo, preguntale, que es, ¿cuánto va a valer el Bitcoin dentro de un año? Es la pregunta que te quería hacer.
No va a valer lo que vale hoy.
¿Más? Bueno, gracias a todos. Chao.
Gracias, Wences. Un placer haberte tenido.